Ordinance number 190485, directing the city manager to issue a request for information and a request for proposal qualifications for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of a new 12-field soccer complex in the city's Northland, authorizing the Director of Finance to close project accounts, declaring the intent of the city to reimburse itself for the bond proceeds for certain expenditures, and recognizing this ordinance have an accelerated effective date.
All right, great. Thank you. This ordinance was transferred to our committee from finance, and so we'll talk a little finance here and also hear about some development in the Northland, and looking forward to it. So we want to start with you.
So I'm Alicia Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of the Platte County Economic Development Council, and with me is Darren Hennon. Darren chairs my Area Development Committee that much of this work has come out of. We'll wait until we get this up and running. There's a computer issue, so it's a good thing you have hard copies. Okay.
Go ahead. She'll get it up.
All right. So, yeah, I'll just jump right in while she continues with that. There we go. Thank you. So hopefully you've heard about the Northland Sporting Complex. We've been working on it for a long time. We are going to go over timeline, concepts, the economic impact, and then, of course, with regard to the ordinance and what our request is. So the Platte County EDC started this effort with the help of the City Council. The City Council put into place a task force in June of 2013. That task force was chaired by past Councilman Ed Ford and the late Ed Bradley. It took us about 2 years to work through that process, and then in June of 15, we presented the Twin Creeks Task Force report to City Council. One of the things that a couple of things, key findings from that task force, one of them was that in that area, I'm sorry, we're off one. Yeah, there you go. There we go. One of the key things in that task force was the potential growth in the Northland area. And with that growth, then, the understanding the need for improved infrastructure as well as 1,100 acres of parks. The one piece that the task force did not get to was a destination. We believed that there was an opportunity for a destination. We pulled together a destination subcommittee. It was chaired by, at the time, Platte County Parks' Brian Nowotny and Richard Allen with KCMO Parks. So that destination committee went through several months of work, and that began in November of 2015. We focused on several of the areas that you can see there and called in experts to help us with that to learn more about what some of those different areas, possibilities for destination could be. And what came out of it in then August of 2016 was a task force report that showed that a soccer multi-use facility that could be built collaboratively between public and private sectors was really key. And I would say Northland, but I would tell you in all of the KC Metro area. And so then for the next year, we worked to identify a consultant to do a market feasibility and economic impact study. The Platte County EDC contracted with them, and then that report was in September of 17 was when we contracted, and they presented their report to us in November of 2017. And it identified, again, synthetic turf fields, and Darren's going to go into a little bit more of the complex itself.
Okay, good morning. Again, my name is Darren Hennon, representing the Platte County EDC. I serve on the board of directors as well as chairing the KCI Corridor Committee. So once we had our feasibility and our market rate or our market impact study, we wanted to start looking around geographically in the area. We had 4 considerations. This was focused on the Twin Creeks area, so we had about 15,000 square acres that we were targeting. If you look, you'll see a series of dots that represent all the geographic areas that we took a focus on. They were eliminated for a variety of reasons. They were added for a variety of reasons. We wanted interstate access for proximity, the ease of getting in and out of the facility. Hotels was a major consideration. If you look over towards to the left of the project in the I-29 corridor, one of the things that we did early on is we met with our hotelers, some of who I think may be here today. What we wanted to do, we realized that our hotel traffic dips as business travel goes out on Thursday night. The Thursdays to Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, that we have a large capacity over the weekend, and that putting something in geographic proximity to those precludes us from having to build additional hotels around the complex. So we looked at a number of different iterations. You'll see all the different variations, the concepts that came up about. The number one driving factor in this was we believe that the public sector, and we consider this a park, would have an obligation to, this is what we should be doing as a public sector. The private sector, and that's what we talk about, economic activity, should be the ones that take all the responsibility of developing the property and creating economic activity with that. Now, I mentioned there could be potential hotels driven directly by this, restaurants, the type of things that you would expect a complex of this size to do. So those were our considerations. We looked around. We've narrowed it down a little bit. This isn't, you'll hear in a few moments about an RFQ or RFI process. But the complex that we're basically focusing and going to be discussing today is 12 synthetic fields, fully illuminated, fully lit. Synthetic is key. If you're going to host out-of-town tournaments and people expect to travel great distance, they're not going to travel if you're playing on grass and it's mud and you get a rain out. This weekend could be a great example. We're anticipating some inclement weather. 15 minutes after a rainstorm, barring any lightning, you could be back on these fields playing tournament caliber. 3 concession stands, restroom play areas. This is key for us. We want this facility to be used as close to year-round as possible in our geographic area. So this, we refer to this as a sporting complex that can accommodate soccer, lacrosse, baseball, softball, flag football, football, and field hockey. So we expect these fields to get put into play, to get used, to be maxed out. That's the ultimate goal. We have a community park. If you look somewhat to the, you'll see the tree line in the top. If you moved off to your left, you'll see a community park. That's futsal. That's a small court, pickleball, basketball, a play area. This ties into our trail system. That was also incredibly important. 15,000 square foot field house, a festival ground with stage and flexible sporting. So we have a geographic area that we can kind of rally around even if it's not sporting related. We have stadium field with permanent grandstand and expansion seating. You'll hear some other testimony why we're looking for that. And then pedestrian trail connections to the linear park, schools, and neighborhoods. So conceptually, that's how it's laid out. You'll see the highway, you'll see access. We have some neighboring partners, school districts that we've been working closely with that would also have some benefit to this as well. So the economic impact is derived from the study. We have an estimated construction cost of $42 million. That's land, that's design, that's construction, soup to nuts if you put everything in. The tournament attendance we anticipate will attract approximately 71,000 plus out-of-town guests annually. So if you think about that, where are they going to stay? We have the hotels that we just mentioned on the I-29 corridor, the importance of being able to put that money back into play. That goes into our CVA, our tax, and the things that we do with that. Direct tourism impact is 14.1 annually, indirect expenditures of about 19.7. So we expect about 59,300 hotel guests a night. Annually. So the ordinance today, and then we're going to step aside. I know you have a couple others. What's key to this is that we would request, or there's a request for an RFI and an RFQ that calls for design, construction, operation, and maintenance. Are key to this, and you'll hear again, we do not want to put any financial strain on our parks department. We want to design something that becomes self-sustaining. We want to look for partners that can maintain the operation of this and maintain it and create a high-quality product in the Northland. So the sources of funding are before you. They're also derived out of the ordinance. That concludes the overall overview. We'll be happy to answer any questions while we're here or step aside. I know you have a lot of folks that want to testify, so we'll let that happen as well.
Wes Minder is here with us today. If you have questions about the RFI, RFQ process, because it's a public process, Wes is here to address that. And then we also have Director Randy Landis here to kind of help us understand the financial piece. So unless you have direct questions of us, would you like to hear from Wes and Randy first?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get some staff presentations. Do appreciate you all's thorough presentation and high-level
Thank you for
overview.
allowing us. I know you had a whole docket today.
Oh, sure. This is nothing compared to some of that other stuff we've dealt with. Who wants to go first? Randy, rock, paper, scissors?
I think I'll take the mic first, Mr. Chairman.
drop it.
Randy Landis, Finance Director. I've given you a packet that's at your chair, so I just want to maybe talk about the right panel of Darren's slide and just kind of walk you through the plan of finance. And the plan of finance is not completely cooked yet. These are concepts, and as we talk through them, you guys will have to think about the policy implications of what's being presented to you. Kevin has already heard the debt under consideration speech that I'll be giving at next week's business session, so you have to think about total debt and how this would fit into that overall mix. But we'll talk precisely about the sources of revenues and the proposed plan of finance as it's currently put together. So you heard $42 million. That's the current estimate for the total project. The notion is that the developer, per the RFIPQ process, would be required to acquire the land. So if you start thinking about the public financing part of this, at least the current proposal, as we imagine it, would be a special obligation bond of the city of about $40 million. So if you look at the packet that I've given you there, Dan Bagunu, who's our development finance manager, put this together for us. And you have some quick facts on the front page. If there's an attachment after the front page that shows you an amortization schedule for a $40 million special obligation bond issue. So if you're thinking about where does this fit in the budget and how are we going to pay for it, your first thing you're going to be thinking about is, I got $3.4 million worth of annualized debt service that has to be sourced from some place in the budget. This ordinance throws out a few new concepts, things that you probably haven't thought about before, and you really don't have a policy on, so we're going to talk about those in a minute. The first item on the list is sort of easy. The second district in-district council members are considering putting a portion of their neighborhood PIAC money into this. We don't have the exact amount. Perhaps they can talk about that. I don't know that we've kind of talked through that specifically yet and where that would come in. I can give you an idea financially where it might be helpful, but there might be some initial expenses, some of the things that might come in, maybe even Wes can tell you where it might come in. But that is one thing that is on the table in some amount. And keep in mind, that's a very limited resource, as all of you know. $3.5 million a year or so, I think, is the current bogey for PIAC funds that are available for neighborhood projects. So this is sort of a limited universe with regards to what could pay an annual amount of $3.4 million a year. And then we have a brand new concept, all right? So this notion of tax increment financing, I think, is pretty well understood. You put an area plan in place, you activate projects, they have a clock for 23 years, you set a base amount of taxes that were collected in the year before, and you have 50% of economic activity taxes available to point toward project costs. And you can either capitalize those through a loan or a bond sale, or you can do them pay as you go. So when a TIF plan or area is in place, you have generators in the area generating these taxes over the base amount, and they're available to do projects or to pay for project costs of a development. So you're all very familiar with that. But what happens when those projects, their life ends? I'm going to ask you to look at a couple of things in your packet just to give you an idea where they land in the budget. So if you would go to the very two last pages, and these are schedules from the adopted budget. And I just want to refer you to Schedule 12, one that says Capital Improvements Fund, and then there's another one just right behind it called the Parks Fund. If you look in the last column entitled Adopted Fiscal 1920, and you work your way down to the revenue part, if you can look on the first one, you can see a number $86 million is the estimated amount of capital improvement sales tax on a gross basis that would be available for the budget this year. What happens to that, though, is immediately you see a negative number right behind it, almost $11 million. This represents the aggregate tax redirections for all economic activity tax related TIFs and STIFs around the city, all right? So you see 86 gross, 11 out. You can see what the net is available to do things that you do through the regular part of the budget. The negative number never hits your budget, all right? Because we have TIF contracts, it's not a budgeted amount, it's not appropriated, it goes around the budget, gets deposited in an agency fund, and then goes right out to meet the contractual requirements of the TIF plan. So your budget is net of TIF, just so you can think of it that way. So what happens when that negative number decreases in the future? So if you go back, and you can see, I failed to mention, you can look and see that the park tax has the same issue. $43 million gross, $5.2 million coming out on TIF increment. So if you look back one page behind that, you can see a new sheet entitled Platte County Regional Tax Redirection Estimate Without Growth. So what we've done conceptually, the manager suggested that we look at this at the behest of the in-district council members, is what if we took increment that's currently being generated and is currently going around the budget in future years when it starts coming back to the budget and dedicate it to a project north of the river, just like the current TIF redirections are working in those plans north of the river. So the notion is you will see an increase in the aggregate amount of taxes available in those funds. What do you do with it? Do you continue to redirect it through some agreement, or do you capture it and use it for whatever those taxes are intended for? In this case, capital improvements or parks operations and capital. So this schedule that we show you is our current estimate of expiring TIFs north of the river, and we picked on a few of them: Berrytown, KCI Corridor, Platte Purchase, and Shoal Creek. This doesn't tell you that those plan areas are terminating in these years, but there are projects in each of these plan areas that are terminating, and they will generate arguably additional gross taxes in the CIP and parks tax that could be used for whatever those taxes are intended for, or could be redirected, maintain the local capture north of the river and pointed toward a project that would benefit the whole city, but effectively be generated north and spent north. So as you can see, if you go down that column, we have a total column. In the early years, it doesn't match up to $3.4 million. Remember the $3.4 million number? But you can see in the out years, it grows substantially. So we're talking about potentially using all or a portion of these newly available taxes within these two funds to point towards debt service, principal and interest on a $40 million bond issue that we would issue to build the complex. So that's the concept relative to how do we use expiring TIFs north of the river, continue sort of effectively a local capture as if the TIF was still in place, and then point them to pay principal and interest on bonds to be issued in the future to build the project. So I will stop there and let you ask any questions, and then I'll talk about the KCI Corridor TIF, and then I'll probably flip it to Wes to talk about the RFIPQ discussion. Any questions on that?
Questions? Mayor-elect Lucas.
Proud 3rd District at large, Councilman. I just want to get the generalities. I do appreciate the presentation. However, when you visited us and you come to a number of committees, on the Planning, Zoning, Economic Development Committee, you don't usually talk about expiring TIFs as something different than just tax revenue, correct? I mean, these are just tax. This is tax revenue. It's otherwise general fund.
Well, and again, you have two special revenue funds. You have two voted taxes that are voted for a specific purpose, capital or parks. We can tell you, we think, there are other things in the TIF Trojan horse, right? So there are more taxes than these two. There's public safety sales tax, there's earnings tax, restaurant tax, et cetera. We picked on these two because we think you could make a reasonable legal argument that you could use capital improvements to prepare a capital improvement, and you could use park taxes to pay for a parks facility. But as you said, Mayor-elect, once the TIF is expired, they lose their character as an increment. They are, in fact, taxes of general application from across the city and can be used for the purposes for which they're voted.
I recall when Councilman Reed and I and many others were working on the Urban Youth Academy, there was in the ordinance, I believe we had a specific amount from 3rd District Capital Improvement Sales Tax Funds that were listed actually prior to passage of the ordinance. There was some debate at council in connection with that. I don't know if I see that in this ordinance yet. Is it there? As in how many PIAC dollars is the 2nd District endeavoring contributing per annum?
Well, again, this is a plan of finance that is not fully completed. We are working on it. I don't know that we have a firm commitment, and I'll let the council members speak for themselves. But part of our job would be to find a way to ensure that the least amount, from PIAC would be put in this, unless there's some policy reason to do that. But again, that's still something that we're working on. But you can see there's evidence here that there's enough money in the out years to do the whole thing if council elected by policy to sort of agree with this concept. As you can see in the early years, there's a couple years where there isn't enough money, so we may have to go to other sources because $817,000 won't pay a $3.4 million debt service in the early years. So I'll let the council members speak to potentially their...
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Fowler, you have a response?
Yes, to that point, 2nd District has pledged initially $250,000 a year for 4 years. The remainder of our term would generate $1 million.
I would like to, just out of an abundance of caution, see that reflected in the ordinance, if we could. I just know the hard work that Councilman Reed really led on when we were doing Urban Youth Baseball Academy and every project in the historic Jazz District. We've often spelled out some of that commitment. So,
yeah, I also would probably add that I know initially when we had this discussion, Councilman Fowler, that was your response as well. I would add that we ensure we put that in the fact sheet because it still does state in an amount to be determined as it relates to the 2nd District Neighborhood Capital Improvement Sales Tax. But additionally, I'm not sure which line, or maybe it's a separate section in the actual ordinance itself here that we should probably indicate that same amount and that intent. And then also, I know this is your line of questioning, Mayor-elect Lucas, but if I'm not mistaken, to the point that you're making, that also has been reflected in the actual PIAC expenditures from the allocations. And while I don't have that in front of me, I probably could go get my budget book, but I think that also needs to be listed, or maybe you guys can show us where that is amended. Of course, the council adopts that priority every year as part of the capital improvements sales tax, but I do think that's appropriate, and I know that this isn't something that we're just discussing now, but I know it's something that the council members, both Laura and Fowler, had been working toward and had indicated.
Councilman Reed, on that, Westminster City Manager's Office. On that, previously the 1st and 2nd Council District did that in this current term with Maple Woods Parkway, where they each pledged $500,000 for 4 years. And so what happens is when the budget office develops their in-district list to send to them to spend, the spreadsheet that Ms. Rose Rhodes sent out, that is in there. So it'll be in there so that they know that it's in there. But
yeah, that's what I just said.
That was codified in writing with a memo from them that said we will spend that money on that.
Yeah.
I'd like to maybe just address one thing Mayor-elect said with regards to, we've heard you say other things in other venues, particularly plans and zoning relative to, in that case, expiring TIFs, and we talked a little bit about surplus. And really the comment I made in the other committees was you have a revenue policy and a one-time revenue policy portion of that policy, right? So what I was speaking to was when you have, plans that terminate in their surplus. It's effectively one-time revenue. Here we're talking about sort of a different concept, which is you don't really have a policy about what do you do when TIFs expire and they produce sort of ongoing revenue, which effectively, as you've stated, is just taxes. But to the extent that it is generated and has been historically generated in a particular area of the city, do you all think that's an appropriate policy choice to say, you know what, it's generated here, there are needs here, we want to continue to use what was increment and is now just a portion of the tax and dedicate it going into the future for an amenity or some infrastructure? That's a question. I think it's a good policy discussion.
So I might continue on the line of questioning because it's an interesting policy question, but you know, we always have to be mindful of what may come ahead. So I'm concerned if 2 years from now, Councilwoman Catherine Shields says there are all of these expiring TIFs in the 4th District, of which there are a ton. Yeah. And she says, I think it should all just go to name your downtown baseball stadium or anything of the sort. Yeah. And so my question actually, or area of analysis is, because this is creative, and you're a creative man, and so thank you for all of this.
I'm not the author of this, but I'm the reporter.
Wonderful. My view is to kind of see these as tax dollars, not saying that that's about the merits of the project, but talk to us more about the benefit of the project. And I guess what I might be interested in, and I don't know if this comes later, but is the Director of Parks and Recreation kind of talking to us about other soccer operations in the city, right? Some of the additional benefits we get, kind of how it works structurally for us, knowing that we can see these in a lot of different ways, but in some ways they're tax dollars that we're electing to spend to invest. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for it, but that's kind of the area of conversation I'm interested in.
Yeah, and actually it is the appropriate time, and I think the larger piece to what he's asking, and at least I know what I would like for us to get to, is what the actual ballot language says. Because if my memory serves me correctly, when we were doing the Urban Youth Baseball Academy, the actual language had to match what that looked like. And so I know we need to ensure that that's part of this as well. And I think if you could maybe add that as part of your discussion points as well.
Yeah, and again, this is a fairly hedged ordinance, and it says, to the extent they're available from the following sources. So our intent is to review the items enumerated in Section 1 and make certain that we've crossed those T's, Mr. Chair, relative to the ballot language for the individual taxes, ensuring that they're appropriate fit, determining, again, we can make the committee sub with regards to the 2nd District in district. And then I have only one more thing to talk about, which sort of kind of falls in that discussion, which is the incremental activity taxes from KCI Corridor TIF. So I'll try and get out of the way. There has been a new revenue study for the KCI Corridor TIF. Development Dynamics had done it. Alicia was up here earlier, and she actually commissioned that report, and we've received. We've not had a chance to review it yet, but there is some potential that an active TIF north of the river, KCI Corridor, will spin off increment in and over and above the current obligation. So we have yet another legal review to say, okay, we've got all these obligations, we've got this TIF area, KCI Corridor, there's a number of bond issues, there's pay-as-you-go, there's set-asides. We need to go through that legal discussion and say, okay, what's available from this report that could write down what you have to get from the tax revenue. So that's our next step, is to kind of go through this. There has been an estimate thrown out there that there could be as much as $17 million if you capitalize it, i.e., took the present value of the future cash flows from KCI Corridor and made that available as a amount toward the construction fund. We've not verified that yet. That's been sort of talked about by the financial advisor to the IDA, the Platte County IDA, and then also in conjunction with this revenue report. So we're still sort of marinating on how these pieces will come together, and our plan would be, once the plan of finance is put together fully, we'll come back and say, okay, it's this much from in-district, here's the plan for CIP and or parks, and here's what we think we can get from KCI corridor TIF, and if there are other things that we find along the way that are additive that could, reduce the stress on the capital budget or the operating budget of parks and give them new, increment to be spent on the things they do, we'll certainly do that. But we're just not really there yet. We're sort of in this conceptual stage right now, but I think we wanted to at least proof out to you that, all things being equal, relative to parks and capital improvement, there is an opportunity set out there with these expiring TIFs. You have to also assume no economic cycle and no ups and downs and other TIFs, but if you just kind of focus narrowly, there are dollars that will become available.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up?
Yes, please go right ahead.
And maybe this is the direction you're looking from us, or you're looking for from us, which is, I almost see kind of, to use a finance term probably incorrectly, but a waterfall of different priority areas. And as you might imagine, I want the least restricted funds to be the least used in this project. And so if I were saying kind of funding priorities, as much as we could fund from incremental activity taxes from the KCI corridor TIF is by far the preference, right? Followed by probably, and I hate to speak for them, but I would guess second district, in-district capital improvement sales taxes, followed by, because then all of the others, both capital improvement sales taxes and park sales taxes from expiring TIFs north of the river, in other words, are just funds that would otherwise go into the general fund.
Well, they go into these
parks or
these two special
right?
revenue funds.
Right, special revenue.
But they're available.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And could be used for broader
parks
purposes.
or capital.
And
right.
So do you need us to specify that in the ordinance, or is that already what your focus would be? And
I would defer to the sponsors. Again, this was written in response to the council members' request to sort of get this concept before you, get you comfortable with the generators and how they'd be applied, and then to get your approval to move forward with the RFP queue process relative to the development and the construction, and then also to sort of approve the concept of the bond issue, in terms of, are we committed to go forward to provide the funding for this soccer complex because we deem it a priority?
well, I might offer to the co-sponsors, and I don't see how it would change the ordinance if we at least told them priority areas from which to get the funds, starting with the KCI corridor TIFs and going on.
Yeah, we have no problem with that. Yeah, I think that would be our preference as well. We're committed to funding this at some level of our PIAC money. Okay, we've initially said $250,000. If we had to fill in a gap somewhere else, we'd probably do it. That just seemed like a reasonable number in light of the other requests we get. And then certainly the increment that's available from KCI corridor should come first because that is what is there. And then the tax direction would come after that. I think along this line, it's a little bit advantageous to review the history of both the KCI corridor, Shoal Creek, and to a much lesser extent, because it generate that much tax dollars, is the Berrytown TIF and also Plat Purchase Redevelopment TIF, why they're there and what they do and how they really work. First of all, they only include 50% of the economic activities taxes generated by projects in those areas that were commenced after the TIF was initiated. The one that comes to mind for me most is Plat Purchase because Costco is the driver there right now. But that TIF did not exist prior to Costco. Well, it did actually, in fact, exist prior to Costco. Before Costco was built, came online, we passed that TIF. We capture 50% of the economic activities tax. The other 50% goes into the general fund. Okay. That 50% is used to develop roads, bridges, whatever we need, the infrastructure around that area in the TIF jurisdiction. So as that builds out, as we improve those roads and build out the infrastructure up there, that in turn opens the area for further development and the further generation of additional tax dollars. They're in the TIF, so it's 50% city, 50% goes back into the TIF for a continuation of that. That was Shoal Creek was the first one that we'd done that way, as far as I know, followed on its heels by KCI Corridor. So all of the economic activity, we look at, the taxes here, none of these would have existed. We'd never had any of this revenue, 50% or otherwise, had it not been for those TIFs being initiated. So those TIFs are responsible for the generation of all of the dollars we're getting now. The 50%, the 50% goes into the TIFs themselves. They don't take a thing away from the schools. They don't use any of the real estate taxes. None of that. Those also continue to come into the economy because those TIFs are there. We expect the same thing to happen with the Northland Sporting Complex, because it will spur development around it. In fact, so that is part of the entire concept, is to put economic activities tax generators on either side of it. That will not be developed by us. That will not be part of this. That will be done by private. But that will generate more dollars there that will come into our variety of funds, including our schools, our parks, the entire box of things that we use to generate our tax dollars. The real estate taxes of those private developments will continue. They will grow because we've put the Northland Soccer Complex there. So our hope is that, just as has happened with Shoal Creek and KCI Corridor TIF, over the life of this complex, we will actually generate a lot more revenue than we've ever taken in off of the 50% of the economic activities taxes. That's kind of why we're doing this project. Along with the overwhelming need for this project, the study of a number of years ago was we needed 120 soccer fields in the city. We're not even approaching that. This adds 12. And it's designed to work in conjunction with the soccer complex out at Shoal Creek as well. I'm probably getting off that subject, but while I had the opening, I wanted to throw
I was just getting ready to say, you're preaching here, and
all right.
I was going to give you an amen and try to juice you up a little bit more.
Okay.
But, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that your comments are spot on. I think the policy decision that we're faced with is trying to ensure that we have a protection in place to, within this language that was drafted. I do think that we probably have a solution, but I know that Councilmember Vice Chair McManus had some questions or comments he'd like to make.
I like the way the discussion is going, because I think it's getting us a little bit more certainty with how the allocations are getting. And as you, I think, admitted at the beginning, is these things haven't been fully sorted out yet. So I'm trying to understand, I guess, legally where we're headed. We're directing the city manager to issue an RFP. We're not approving a finance plan yet, or we're kind of, I guess, maybe showing a little leg on that, but not really necessarily committing ourselves to it. I guess, so what I think Mayor-elect Lucas is trying to get to is get us some more certainty in the ordinance as to what that's going to look like. But I'm trying to understand, even if we do that, are we going to get a financing plan that comes to the city council that then we vote on as well? Or is this fully cooked when we do this?
No, the latter. You're going to get a finance plan. And again, you guys might also be thinking, again, we're kind of throwing a lot of stuff against the wall today to give you some ideas. You don't have to split between the parks and CIP tax. You could go all CIP. I mean, there are variations on this theme, and you can talk amongst yourselves and say, well, we don't like this. We don't like this idea. Because right now it splits kind of a 2/3, 1/3. So in my simple mind, I would just take that $3.4 million debt service, split it 1/3, 2/3, stick it in as budgeted line items, and we're done for 20 years. And you'll just have an amount that you're paying. That's kind of how we would do it mechanically in the budget. And if you want, and that would be netted against whatever the PIAC produced and whatever the KCI corridor took off, the top of that. So that's how we would approach it. If you don't like that approach and you'd say, we want to go 100% parks, or we want to go CIP, or we don't like this at all, that would be helpful to know as well. But this sort of just says, city manager, look at these things. We're giving you what we know currently. And if you guys come back and say, no, we've talked amongst ourselves, we don't like any of that item number 1, 2, or 3, we want to do it this way, but these are the current resources available.
Just one follow-up question. The $42 million is for design, construction, operation. Well, what is it for? It's for design and construction?
Yes.
And then the acquisition is by the private developer?
Per the resolution, or per the ordinance. Yeah.
And so is that private money for acquisition? That's why or is that part of the 42?
Councilman, the intent is for the $42 million to be included in the land acquisition, to be included in the cost of that, but the developer would be the one negotiating that, because there's some benefits when the development team can negotiate those rather than the city doing the negotiations.
And so I guess is the RFP going to clarify who owns the dirt when it's done, or how does this work? I'm just trying to legally, structurally, who's the owner and operator?
The city will own it, the Parks Department will own it, but the developer will operate and maintain it during that. And so we will have clauses in a development agreement. That's what one of the sections outlines that we will bring back to the council. But it will outline the terms of that maintenance and operations agreement so that they are the ones that are responsible for keeping the upkeep of the turf and whatnot from the revenues generated from the facility.
So I assume all this would be fleshed out in the RFP process. There would be more detail kind of when it comes back to us, because it's going to have to come back to us.
If you want, I could give you a quick overview of what we're thinking for the RFI, RFQ process. So if you want me to do that right now.
I don't want to overtake the committee, but it's really...
Vice Chair.
Well, we've got a lot of people here that want to be able to...
I can do it real quick. I'm pretty quick.
Sure.
Let's see if you can do it in 1 minute.
1 minute. So we're doing a two-step RFI, RFP. It'll be an agreement or a selection for design, build, operate, and maintain the facility. It'll be a two-step process. What we would do is we would issue a request for information so that teams could form and submit their qualifications, and then staff would get together, review those responses, determine whether or not which teams are responsive and qualified to perform the action and operate the facility. Then we would ask for the second step. We would ask for proposals, an actual cost proposal outlining the terms and the maintenance operations plan and their financing for it. And then we would select a qualified team. And the way we would do this is we would develop an internal city team where we'd have staff from law, HRD, city planning and development, Parks Department, finance, procurement, fire department, police, so that we would have all the input in the design and the operation stuff so that that team's aware of what we're looking and expecting. And we would hope to complete that pursuant to kind of what the direction that we've got, that we would get that done this year so that construction could start early next year.
That was 1 minute and 5 seconds.
That was that was pretty good.
I had a few I think.
Director Reiner, we're not going to let you off the hook. Mayor-elect Lucas said that he wanted to hear from you. Let's see what you got.
Thank you for putting me in this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad position. So, great project, and we're very supportive of that. I would be remiss if I did not say I'm very concerned about our park sales tax and our shrinking fund balance. So if we can do it in a way that doesn't hurt our bottom line, then we absolutely think it's a great project. That's kind of the long and the short of it. You know, we've talked about some ways to build those protections. Randy just said a minute ago that we would have a $1.4 million obligation for 20 years. I think I would argue we would not want that to be the case. So that's where we are.
Someone wants to hand up to
I was just wondering if the park board had taken a position on this.
The park board has said pretty much what I reiterated is great project. They support it. They want to make sure that we're not stuck with any overextended operating costs, and that there's a firm amount of years that we would be basically doing the redirect, and not at the expense of our responsibilities throughout the city.
It's a great project if you don't have to pay for it.
You don't have to pay too much for it. How about that?
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Mayor-elect Lucas.
Are there revenue, on the parks issue, are there revenue generating opportunities for the Department of Parks and Recreation stemming from this project?
There could be when we get to the operating agreement. There could be. I can tell you one of our desires, and this is coming from the board as well, would be depending on who the persons are that get the agreement. If there's an opportunity to renegotiate our agreement at Swope, we would definitely want to do that. And the reason is at Swope we have to pay the difference. If you add the expenses and the capital expenditure fund, we have to pay that difference now out of park sales tax. So if there was a way we could, enough revenue could be made up here to offset that cost, that would be a good thing.
That would be part of the RFPQ process with regards to the operate and maintain. You can expect that the privately generated resources, naming rights, concessions, things like that would initially be used to offset operations, and to the extent that there was surplus, you can negotiate for, soccer and Swope Park, and then you can also ensure that this facility doesn't end up like Swope Park where there's a delta that Parks Department has to meet through the park sales tax as they do currently.
Did we give a time frame on that RFP, RFQ?
So from staff's perspective, we didn't want to move forward with anything until we had some direction from the council, and so we would wait for the passage of this ordinance, but we have been meeting just generically internally. We've got some previous design, build, operate, maintain, most recently the clean natural gas facility we did down at our municipal service center, but we would structure it that sort of way internally, and then we would issue it hopefully within 2 to 3 weeks after passage of the ordinance.
Yeah, and then how long will that be out? 30 days?
We would probably
days,
have it.
60
We would
days?
probably have it advertised about 60 days for the first initial one, and then we would try to do a quick turnaround, and then for the second phase process, probably another 60 days open procurement for the proposals. So probably about a three if we really get a lot of momentum behind it. More realistically, 4-month process.
Mayor-elect Lucas.
Just thinking about the park sales tax again, and I'm sympathetic to your point. And I think there was one issue with the Swope Soccer Village, which was, I believe, a predecessor in the 5th District of our current office holders. And they made a number of commitments about how different was it going to be capital improvement sales tax funds would be used to help support that project. And then as you got new personnel in these seats, did folks kind of change their perspective? And I guess the protection I'm looking for here is to ensure, although we just had an election, if those who may succeed, councilpersons Lohr and Fowler, elect to take a different approach, as we might have seen in the 5th District, how do we make sure that Parks all of a sudden isn't the group that makes up for it?
Well, the concept for the Swope Soccer Complex was not dissimilar from this effectively policy-wise, because the notion was we had the Winchester TIF that was expiring, which was mostly an earnings tax-based TIF, not sales tax. So in that case, what we were talking about, we issued bonds. We said, hey, there's going to be more earnings tax theoretically that's deposited into the general fund, and we're going to make those dollars available to service that debt to build that complex. What happened over time, over multiple budget cycles, was eventually that debt service was moved from the general fund to the parks sales tax fund and included in their overall mix of what they have to pay for. So it's a matter of your budget policy can determine if the manager presents something to you that says, hey, we started over here, but now we're going over here, and you hear that from the Parks Department, that they're keenly aware of that move and tend to be a little concerned that it might happen again. So you could guard against that if you wanted to in this project and say either it's a limited pledge or, we're never going to move it out or something like that, and that would be that safeguard.
So, my recommendation might be, and I'll stop talking then, we can, in Section 1, I think I would just want us to be as clear as possible that we wish to exhaust from our first funding source the incremental economic activity taxes from the KCI corridor TIF to the maximum extent possible. And then, right, we'd go with second district and district capital improvements, then capital improvement sales taxes from the Northland sources, and then and only then, right, are we looking to parks kind of doing it. So maybe what I'm recommending is not quite a 2/3, 1/3 parks just has it on their books, but instead maybe even up to including, it's harder for a financing officer, but I know you're all sharp, but each year we just really see how much KCI corridor TIF is providing, and only then are we looking for the backstop.
Yeah, we'll do an estimate each year about what it produces, and keep in mind, as we go through that legal discussion on KCI corridor TIF, the only thing it can be applied to is public infrastructure.
Sure.
We learned that with the Northland Fire Station, that Shoal Creek, you couldn't just use it for whatever cost. You had to have it, dedicated, because you can build a building with it, for example. So we'll make certain that allocation is done, and each year it will be a calculation with a new estimate for KCI corridor TIF to offset any pain that might be in the park sales tax, if that's the wish of the council.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I comment?
Yeah, go ahead. Councilman Valor.
I just want to say, I think I'm a little disappointed today, particularly in staff, for handing us something that is, you keep saying it's half cooked, Randy. Well, why is that? Why haven't you come to talk to me? We've been working on this for months, and to send us something like this, I don't understand. Number one, Dan so eloquently put, all of this money is being generated in the Northland. We are a net revenue area of the city, which means we give more to the city than we get back. So I don't understand why we haven't lined this up. Now, I think Mayor-elect Lucas has made a good plan here on how we do this. Why wasn't that given to us in the first place? I don't know why we're sitting here arguing about this and people getting upset and the council members getting pitted against each other because we don't have what we ask for. So I personally, we're here to set policy. Bring us something that we can deal with. I mean, I'm actually somewhat embarrassed sitting up here, not knowing what it is we're asking for or doing. So maybe it's the city manager's fault. I have been talking only to him about this. So I want to know how we move forward from here. This is a project. We don't ask for much in the Northland. So, and we don't get much, I tell you for sure. We spent 4 years trying to build a fire station that was so desperately needed. So I don't understand why we build everything all around the city, and the one thing we want for our kids, and it's being bantered around like this. So personally, I'm upset about everything that's gone on here this morning and all of this discussion that's had. Hopefully we can work something out and get an RFQ out to move this project forward. I know Dan and I are committed to this. We are ready to go. We've been ready to go. The EDC's been ready to go. The Chamber's been ready to go. And we can't get the city bureaucracy to move. So that's my 2 cents.
Good 2 cents. I would say take a deep breath. I don't think that as you actually took one. I don't think we're trying to have an argument. Obviously, there's a lot of projects that we argue about and spend a lot of time on and hold them for weeks on hand, and I don't think that's the purpose of the line of questioning here today. I think it's more of a trying to come up with some protections. As I sit here, all I keep thinking about is Schoolhouse Rock. You guys are probably too young to remember that. I'm just a Bill. I'm
going to say exactly what Councilman Shields said.
Yeah. And I just think it's a matter of trying to ensure that there are some protections, and I think that I don't believe heard anyone speak in opposition on the committee for the actual project before us, but there are some real tough questions as it does relates to the actual TIF projects, and having been around here for 8 years and trying to push a lot of these projects and having money taken away from the heart of this city and projects that I've worked on, I know how important that is to be able to protect it. And I remember when Councilman Ed Ford introduced this whole plan and how we actually arrived. It's really kind of cool to see it come to fruition in full circle here, that we're moving a bit forward to finalize a lot of what has actually happened. And I actually, Randy, did you?
I just have one comment, and again, with all respect to the in-district council members, we're still working on the KCI quarter TIF, and we're really holding out hope that that will offset a share of these Northland expiring TIFs, because we think that's the larger issue for the full council. We simply don't have the information. We just got the revenue study, and we want to at least have time to bring it back to you and make certain that you get the full netting effect of that will actually be accretive to this project and actually should help reduce the impact on the citywide expiring TIF issue. Because it's, we could come today and easily just say, we have the expiring TIF information. We think it's a 1/3, 2/3 split. We're done. I mean, that's the plan of finance. It's $40 million, and we have debt service, and you guys could look at that today, and that's a plan. But if you want to see how KCI quarter TIF maybe adds or subtracts from this equation, it's going to take a little bit of time because we just had the revenue study delivered to us a week or so ago.
Councilmember Fowler.
And I want to put in perspective for everyone the numbers that Councilwoman Laura and I have been talking about with the city manager and others in this room. What we think based upon that revenue, first of all, the revenue study was done by George K. Baum, specifically Matt Webster. And you've heard the cliche, tight as a bark on a tree. Matt makes the bark on a tree look extremely loose. He is extremely conservative in his estimates. And so he says $17 million. A little more, a little less. I think probably going to end up more just knowing the way he is. But whatever it is, $17 million is money that's generated that has to be used along the purposes of the KCI quarter TIF. We haven't done a similar thing with Shoal Creek, but understand that both of these TIFs, unlike a lot in this city, have a reputation for overperforming, and that's why we've even talking about $17 million now, is because KCI quarter TIF has overperformed, and that's a good thing. I mean, I hope they can all do that. Second of all, what kind of time frame are we really looking at? We don't want it to go out any farther than it absolutely has to go. So if you net 42, you take out that 17, you get about 25. So that's what we're really looking at from the expiring TIF redirection is $25 million. We think that pays out in 10 or 12 years, maybe even less than 10. So what we're really talking about in terms of what we're committing to is something in that range. The ordinance says 20, but that's because we want to pad in enough to make sure that we are covered, so that if we issue bonds, that there is sufficient funds there. But what we realistically expect is something a lot sooner, and the idea is to pay them off as quickly as possible.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This has been a very good discussion. I know that we had a suggestion for recommendation as well in section, I believe, 5, but I want to maybe have an offline conversation just briefly, if you can, with Nelson here while we do public testimony. If there's no further discussion from the committee.
I'll just say briefly, I will, because, we throw arrows at you sometimes. I'll commend you because serving on the Housing Committee, where we had passed one of these ordinances looking for money, and staff initially kind of came back and said, pass a tax increase. I appreciate that you've found some sources that exist now, and we'll try to enlist you for more of that work ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions, but everybody's here waiting. I'd be happy to hear the public testimony if you would allow me to ask some questions at the end if they aren't answered by the public testimony.
I prefer for the questions to happen now.
You want me to ask them now?
With public testimony, I'm going to be ready to go.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll ask my questions now then. You've really laid out, there's been, by the Platte County Development folks, a pretty attractive picture of the return that can come to this community because of this project. So I'm wondering, now this is basically up by KCI. So in Platte County, so I'm wondering what Platte County's participation is, because they will, I mean, they have a taxing base. I'm assuming they will receive benefit from this complex, and I was just wondering what their thoughts and what their participation were in this project.
I can't speak for the county, but I will say that the county does have a park sales tax, but it does expire in December of 2020 and would need to be renewed by the voters. And they also have a road sales tax, which expires in 2013, but we have an existing agreement with them where we use the funds coming to the city that are paying for projects that are currently under construction, like Northwood Road and Northwest 72nd Street. So when, I guess when Randy can jump in here, but when we look at something like that, there's no guarantee that those taxes will be renewed. So we can't really rely on them for
even being put out, or even be put out for renewal.
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is, I understand why the Platte County EDC would reach out and look to us as partners. We're reasonable partners to want to enlist. I'm just wondering if efforts were also made to reach out to Platte County government so that they could also be partners in this.
I would be happy to address that. When we did the KSAG corridor...
Introduce yourself one more time.
I'm sorry, thank you, yes. Alicia Stevens, Platte County EDC Executive Director. Through this whole process and trying to identify funds, Randy alluded to the revenue study. One of the things that needs more study, or an in-depth study, is any of those sales taxes that are rolling off. So any of the numbers that we have used internally, we have been very conservative in those numbers because we don't want to count numbers that aren't going to be there. So even to ask the county to guarantee a tax that has to go to the vote of the people, we just don't think is a wise step to take, because we don't know if the money will be there.
If those taxes were to renew the revenue capture from the KCI corridor TIF, there would be additional funds, but that number, from what I understand, is not included in the 17 million.
Correct.
So the existing Platte County sales taxes are part of the KCI revenue?
Yes. KCI TIF?
KCI TIF?
Yes.
Even though they're county taxes as opposed to city taxes?
They're sales taxes, yes.
And so they are. So you're saying if they were renewed, if they were put out for renewal, if they were renewed, then those revenues would continue to be captured and would somehow would increase the money available for repayment of bonds.
For the KCI TIF.
Yeah. I guess I'm still wondering, I'm just wondering if Platte County has a position on this.
Well, I can tell you we have reported on this regularly at our EDC board meeting. The county is part of that board meeting. They also have an appointee to our executive committee, so they are fully aware of the project. But I would also say, in their defense a little bit, I don't think they want to commit funds that they don't know are going to be there. We just don't think that would be a wise step to take.
And
we have a Platte County Commissioner. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Dagmar Wood. I'm a commissioner of the 1st District in Platte County, which includes the southern Platte County area in Kansas City, Missouri. And I appreciate the chair and the council's concern about finances. This is something that me as a commissioner, all of our commission has been extremely honed in on in the Platte County side with our parks is responsibly funding and maintaining our park system. So I completely understand everybody's concern in wanting to make sure that this is done right. And I commend Councilwoman Teresa Lohr's concern for that too, and her wanting to vet everything with this. The Platte County sales tax that is dedicated to parks, trails, and stormwater is going to be sunsetting in 2020. In the past, we have, with this feasibility study that Mrs. Stevens Stevens had talked about. We had been a participant in the funding of that. Also yesterday, I had voted on expanding the TIF boundaries to include this project area as well. But with our sales tax sunsetting next year, we do not know and we cannot commit what the public is going to plan on doing with a future renewal. So that there's just a lot of uncertainty there with our current funding, because a lot of it over the last 18 and a half years has just been spent in building infrastructure, and very little of it has been set aside for future maintenance. Before we got on the administration, we have been doubling down on saving for future maintenance, so that just in case a renewal does not happen, we have a little bit of a buffer and we can actually maintain our parks and trails and our stormwater until a next vote comes up. So we have been very focused on providing for the future maintenance, the excellent maintenance of our parks, trails, and providing for stormwater as well. So unfortunately, we can't commit. As Mrs. Stevens alluded, there is TIF money that comes in from that half-cent sales tax as well. But we are hoping to have some kind of a renewal on the ballot next year, but no guarantees, as you well know. So.
Well, I guess I can't argue about somebody who wants to set aside money for maintenance, since that's been my main cry for the last 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've talked about there's going to be a private developer, and that we're going to have the private developer, somebody said, will be responsible for the development. And I understand they're going to be responsible for designing it and building it and operating it. But what about shortfalls? What if when we get to operating this thing, it doesn't operate in the black, which certainly the 63rd Street complex didn't for a number of years. I think it's now reached, if you take aside the issue of paying for the bonds, I think it has a slight surplus each year. But what if we build this using these funds, and then when it's operated, the operational costs are not met? Are we going to require that the developer is responsible for covering those costs, or is that going to go back 2/3, 1/3 onto the Parks Department, as it does now? Actually, 100% goes back on the Parks Department now with our soccer facility out on 63rd Street.
That'll be outlined as we develop that RFI, RFQ, and then also the development agreement. And so we would negotiate that with the selected team, the operations and maintenance side of it, but that agreement would come back to you as a council for ratification, so that we would have some language in there.
Well, and I think the reason I'm raising this now, because we need a negotiating team that just doesn't say, oh, thank God we have an operator. We need a negotiating team that's going to say, what are the responsibilities? For example, if we're going to get somebody, and there has to be some benefit to this developer. So do they get a fee? Will they get a fee? What happens out on 63rd? Do they get a fee for being the managers of this?
No, they don't get a fee. The way the agreement is set up at 63rd Street, and was part of the original development agreement, which also included operations, they pay all expenses. They send all revenue to us. We account for that revenue, and then they send us monthly invoices for their expenses. At the end of the year, we have committed to putting $350,000 in a replacement fund, because we learned from 9th and Van Brunt, you got to have a replacement fund. And that's the piece we've had to help supplement through the park sales tax.
So in other words, they haven't certainly been setting aside funds for maintenance. And I'm just referring to, like with the Chiefs and the Royals, now I know they play in the field, little different situation, but they operate it, they do all the maintenance. There's a schedule of maintenance that's required, and they have to, and there's a set amount of sales tax, public dollars that goes into it, and it's capped. And if there's expenses above that, then the teams have to come up with that. And I don't think any developer is going to be doing this if there isn't some economic benefit to them. And I think particularly, I know we've talked like at Swope Park, it's Sporting KC. I mean, their benefit is that they're creating generations of people, future fans, to come support their team. So I'm just saying, we need to have it spelled out clearly, far better than it was in the Swope Park situation. And I think part of that may have been because the Chiefs had originally built the fields. And so they had made that monetary contribution to it.
Correct. Sporting, in the Swope Park situation, Sporting had already put several $1 million of capital in that project somewhere during those 11 years when I wasn't here. But yeah.
And so, but what I hear from this, even in terms of the capital, we're talking about $42 million. They're going to negotiate the property, but they're not paying for the property. I mean, it seems to me that there should be some financial skin in the game by the developer.
Oh, and I think I was trying to hold off, but maybe the city attorney could probably give my recommendation because I know we're getting in the weeds, which is really important. But could you read what we've come up with? I think it may be helpful,
Okay.
and we were wanting to do it in Section 5, and this was the offline conversation that I wanted to have with Randy, so let's have it online now. All right.
This will be a new Section 5, and we'll move all the other sections accordingly. It will read that prior to the execution of a contract with a selected developer, the city manager is directed to present to council a financing plan identifying the specific sources of funding, including second district, in-district PIAC allocation in the amount of $250,000 per year for 4 years, subject to all code requirements and authorizing ballot language.
That's pretty much it, actually. And again, I think all it really says is we're coming back with the plan of finance, and I think that's what we keep asking. I think we're asking the same question here, trying to get to make sure we have that protection. But obviously, I mean, we've got to come back. I mean, with that.
Right.
With that.
But I think it's also. I mean, the staff is asking for guidance, and I think they need to understand that certainly myself, and I hope some of my colleagues will echo, that we expect this to be a good. Yeah. An actual partnership. We talk about partnerships. Well, partnerships imply that everybody has something in the game. And to me, that means that there needs to be some percentage, and whether this needs to be in the RFQ or not, there needs to be some percentage of money up front put in by the developer. And whether that's, with the Chiefs and the Royals, they put in not quite 25% of the dollars. And so I'm not suggesting in this that you're going to get 25%, but whether it's 10%, whatever it is, there ought to be a contribution by the developer of actual cash to this project. And then I know we talked about the school districts, and they're going to receive benefit from this, which is good. And I'm just wondering if the school districts are going to participate in it. They don't participate in our Northland TIFs, and that's obviously a decision we made. But if, in fact, they're going to be using these facilities for the benefit of their students, and clearly it's not clear enough that I know whether that's true or not, but somebody alluded to that there would be school district participation. I'm just wondering again whether there's
someone here from the school district to speak in public testimony. Plus, we have, and so we'll hold up until that time, but we also have a whole stack of papers from parents and students and stuff that also indicates their participation. But we'll have an opportunity to hear from them.
Well, and I understand participation as running on the field. I'm asking, is there participation from the side of the school districts in terms of the cost of this?
Okay, I don't know that, so that question still stands. And how many more questions you have? Because
I have a couple more.
All right, someone from the school district want to come up now? I saw Dr. something, but
Right.
Who was it?
Dr. Michael Wright.
Okay.
He's the superintendent of the Platte County R3 School District.
Good morning. Thank you. Mike Wright, Platte County Schools. I'm the superintendent of schools. In terms of funding participation, we absolutely are interested in some future participation, but we would be in the same position as the county where we would not be able to commit those funds unless it were to be approved by the voters. So we do believe that there would be the ability specifically to partner on the marquee stadium component of the soccer complex so that we could get more for less mutually, Kansas City and the school district as well. So we are looking to participate if the opportunity exists. I do think that the design is staying agile so that we can allow for us to change as needed depending on whether or not there is a partnership. I would also suggest that we will be developing an adjacent school complex, high school and a middle school, that will have field spaces and parking that we believe would be of use to the future soccer complex as well.
Thank you.
That's very
I'll limit
informative.
your questions now to about 5 minutes, Councilman Brzezinski.
Okay.
Can you do it in 5 minutes? If
All
not,
right.
that's it.
Don't use my 5 minutes now.
Starts now.
Randy, you made a statement that you were looking for guidance, but I heard you say you want a commitment from the council to sell the bonds. And I think until we know the details, it's hard for us to make that commitment.
Yeah, you know, the way we used to do this, you probably remember, and maybe Councilwoman Moore does as well, we used to do resolutions to proceed, and typically for big financings, and you'd say, amongst the 13 of us, do we agree with this concept? Do you want us to build a plan of finance for you? This is sort of that plus. I mean, this is an ordinance. This is a little unusual because we're identifying sources of repayment. So we're kind of a little bit ahead of the game. Our next step for this is you give us this direction. We're going to go out and hire a bond lawyer. We're going to get a financial advisor. We're going to put a plan together. We're going to come with documents that are prepared by the lawyers, and we're going to say, this is the plan. You know, this is the dollar amount, these are the repayment resources and their respective shares, and this is what we want you to prove. So we're kind of giving you more than you'd normally get at this step because there has been so much discussion and there's a lot of information. This notion of expiring TIFs is a new concept. We want to get it before you, and we think that we have some merit to type approaches with the KCI corridor that we need more detail on. So I think we're a little, you know, we're ahead of the game in terms of what we'd normally do at this point in time.
Don't use up all my time.
I'll stop.
I'm just saying, I think you need to understand that the council wants to see all these details that you talk about before we're going to say yes. And particularly what I want to see is what the deal is with the developer. And are they actually coming with dollars to this project? Final question is, I think Dan was talking about economic development around the complex. And this is very exciting for all of us. And that's going to happen because the complex is there. And that in essence, the city, by redirecting these funds, will in fact create this opportunity for other economic development around the complex. I guess my question is given that, do we foresee, are we then going to TIF those activities? Or in fact, is this going to be a catalyst that generates that hotel or restaurant or whatever's needed without an additional subsidy from the taxpayers of Kansas City?
Those developments adjacent to the project would actually be within the boundaries of the existing TIFs. So that would be additional revenue that would be from that kind of first funding source that would be available. So anything that would come up would increase the revenue to the KCI corridor.
I guess what I'm asking, are we going to be
exempting a plan and then putting a new TIF plan in place? That is not the intent.
No, I guess what I'm asking is are we going to need to put additional city dollars, tax dollars, into this development that's supposed to be happening because we're committing $42 million to a soccer stadium? That's what I'm asking.
We will have all the arterial streets and the streets through the soccer complex built, and so it would be just the pad sites would be pad ready. The developer would have to do the grading and utility connections to it, but we will have water, sewer, and the arterial streets completed.
I guess in answer to your question, I think that would become as amendments to an existing TIF plan area that you would have to review and approve. So to the extent that
and
happens.
I understand that, but I'm again trying to make a point that if we're investing $42 million to be a catalyst in the Northland for future development, then we don't want to put more tax dollars in to make that happen, to make those individual sites happen.
But it's already in the TIF. If you put a
I see
hotel
what
in
you're
TIF.
saying, yeah.
I think what you're asking, Councilwoman Shields, is on top of being in that TIF, we're going to give an additional abatements. We haven't done that through anything in either of the KCI Corridor TIF, Shoal Creek, or anything. No, the answer is that is certainly not a concept we have discussed, and it's certainly not something I'd be very much in favor of, frankly, because we don't need to do that generally.
Thank you.
We're giving a big abatement with that soccer complex across the street from them. So that ought to be more than save enough to build some restaurants and stuff in there.
Okay.
All right, that's 5 minutes. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right. Any other questions? Anyone else from the committee have any questions, comments, or Councilman Ballore, anything? Okay. Well, we will at this time have our public testimony for ordinance number 190485. I was looking through the cards here, and I will note that we only have one card that mentions they are opposed. So I would like to, by show of hand, anyone else here oppose outside of the one? Okay. So I see a couple of hands. Let's go, although I don't have cards, and perhaps if there's anyone that has not filled out a card and would like to testify, I believe they are somewhere up here toward the podium. Please fill those cards out, and we will take your public testimony at that time. But let me also mention that you have 2 minutes apiece to make your public testimony, and at your 2-minute mark, I believe a buzzer will likely sound, and you don't have it? Okay, I have my phone. I'll tell you when your 2 minutes is up then, since we don't have that. Let me get this all set up here. And so, of course, your time starts when you start speaking, and then, of course, your time will end once identified. With that, we will start with those who are opposed. And Ben, I have a card from you. If you want to come and start us off, buddy, you got 2 minutes. Okay, thank you.
So good morning. My name is Ben Keefe. I am the president of the Northland Sports Alliance, the board of directors. Thank you to all the council people that are here today. I'll skip some of my remarks. I only have 2 minutes. I will share you with these. I'll email you my prepared remarks. The play-to-pay model is not in the best interest of our entire community. While there are benefits, they certainly do not outweigh the costs. What this proposal will do is primarily benefit for-profit tournament providers, competitive soccer and softball and baseball leagues, club soccer practicing, club camps and games. What you don't hear in there is recreational sports programming. Look at similar developments in the Metro, 135th and Schweitzer, Shields Complex, Wyandotte Sporting Park, Swope Soccer Village, Olathe Soccer Complex. At every one of these complexes, if you want to get onto those fields, you have to pay to play. These fields will continue to further that trend and provide more opportunities to subsidized by the city for people who don't need these subsidies. How is that in the best interest and the participation of everyone? We also have a park in the Northland located at one of the soon-to-be most busiest spots at 152 in Congress. Called Tiffany Springs Park, and for the past few decades, the organization that I'm with, the Northland Sports Alliance, formerly the SPCAA, has been providing recreational programming in numerous sports for Tiffany Hills Park and Mark L. McHenry Park, formerly Tiffany Springs Park, and we've been very successful for decades running a nonprofit, recreational level-based program for the kids in the Park Hill School District and Platte County. It's low cost, and some costs no cost, for our needs-based program for a way to kids to play. In the past few years as an organization, we've been attempting to build out the remainder of that park. You have that plan in front of you. It was designed by Richard Allen of the Parks Department. We've been trying for years to get this finished and have not been able to. There's supposedly PIAC money, about $400,000, that was earmarked for Tiffany Hills Park. We have no allocation of that. There's no accounting of that money. We do not know where that money ever went. We have a plan in place. We have private dollars also lined up to build 6 of these same fields at that location for far less money, anywhere from $2 to $12 million. I would appreciate it if you take a look at those things, listen to that. I will send you the rest of my prepared remarks at the rest of the day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any more of those who oppose? Ms. Owens, you want to speak? All right, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you and good morning.
Morning.
If the city is going to spend $42 million, those funds should be used to improve our basic infrastructure. This funding should be utilized for the reconstruction of our roads, boulevards, and bridges. The proposed funding can also be used to assist with the affordable housing epidemic in addition to improving public bus service to and from the Northland to get people to jobs. I ask that you do not pass this ordinance and that any funding be available to improve the infrastructure. While we're still waiting and continuing to hear about basic services such as trash services, having problems with the trash pickups, why would you want to invest $42 million when you still can't get your trash picked up?
All right. Any others that are opposed and would like to testify at this time? Seeing none, we will go with those who have indicated that they are proponents. And I have my first card from Alan Dietrich. And following him will be Jim Bowers, and then Sheila Tracy. I think she left, though, didn't? Okay. So out there, Sheila, unless somebody wants to testify in her place. All right, buddy. You already spoke. She leave you something? Okay. All right. So we'll leave it with Sheila there. Go ahead.
Good morning, Council. My name is Alan Dietrich. I am Chief Operating Officer for Sporting Kansas City. Have been in this position since 2012. Thank you for your time. We are in full support of this initiative because of some bigger kind of macro impacts we think it'll have for the city. So I just wanted to touch on those briefly. Darren referenced them, but the first is something that I'm sure you all have heard about, the 2026 World Cup. We are in the aggressive bidding phase for Kansas City to be a host city for that. If that occurs, we will host anywhere from 2 to 5 Super Bowls here in Kansas City over the course of a month and a half. And the economic impact on the city will be significant. How this complex plays into that is not only will it demonstrate support from the city for investing in and continue to grow this sport, but it'll also position that complex in KC Mo as a host site for a team that is going to come play here, and or a home base site for a team that's going to be spending those several months in the United States. And the cool thing that occurs there is the teams come, they're looking for a place where they can camp out. In many cases, these teams bring anywhere from 5 to 25,000 fans with them because the sport is that big globally. Those individuals are looking for places to stay in your community and places to eat and to shop. So it's a great opportunity for KC Mo to have a landmark location, and those locations can be built outside of KC Mo and still benefit the Kansas City region. But this is one that would benefit the KC Mo area, and we think is very important. The second thing, which is what the Ben referenced, as well as these national tournaments. Many cities have become quite successful with using just a part of their field time for the purpose of attracting people from all over the country to come into your city to participate in a national tournament. Thanks. Anyway, that's also a great benefit. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you. Jim, I saw you somewhere, didn't I? Yep, there you are.
Chairman, members of the committee, Jim Bowers. I'm with the firm of Roush Fretz, White Goss, Gentile and Rhodes. I'm here today on behalf of MD Management. MD Management has owned property in this area of Kansas City for the last 50 years. That stretch of road, barrier road between I-29 on the west and North Oak on the east has been dominated by properties owned by MD Management over the years. We have been involved very closely in the development of the Kansas City International Airport Corridor TIF plan that was first developed in the 1990s. We've also been deeply involved in the Platte Purchase TIF plan that was adopted more recently, that is being funded primarily by revenues from Costco, which is a site that MD Management developed. We've also been involved with the school district in arranging for the school district to own land immediately adjacent to the soccer facility. We own the land that will be developed commercially and residentially in this area and we are a big supporter of the plan that's before you today. We know there are some things that need to be worked out. We think there's time to do that. We know there will be additional hearings in front of this committee and others to approve the details of these plans, and we're fully prepared to appear and support those plans at that time. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're standing in for Sheila, but you're a proxy and your card was next, so you still only get 2 minutes, though.
Great.
But following you will be Rhonda, and then Doctor, if you want to come up again, you got another 2 minutes, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, good morning, Darren Hennon. As is many of the cases in the Northland, I wear a couple of hats. Sheila had to leave. I have the privilege of serving as the chairman of the board for the Northland Regional Chamber of Commerce for 2019, so I'm going to switch hats on you a little bit. A couple of things. We represent over 700 businesses in Platte and Clay County. We actually talked about this yesterday a little bit with our executive board. One of the things that we look at in economic development, it's a very, very basic concept called the leaky bucket. And the leaky bucket is, what are those services that you're providing elsewhere that you could provide for your own citizens? We have about a 36 to 38% of the population north of the river. Our kids, our youth, predominantly are traveling either to Waco or to one of the other new facilities. Hopefully they're going to Swope, but that's not generally the case. And so that leaky bucket basically says, in Kansas City, what can we capture locally, keep locally, in both terms of revenue, but also in the amenities that we provide. So if we have 189,000 people north of the river, we're not providing that amenity. I would also bring up, too, as we talk about parks, if we're getting close to 40% of the population, we have 10 community centers in our community, and they're all great. Kansas City's tremendous, and we're all about growing all aspects of our community. We have 2 north of the river. And so if we extrapolate that out, we should have 4. But what we've done is partner with other communities and other agencies to fill that gap. What we're doing here, though, is if you drew a circle around the metro, there would be a huge gap in where these youth athletic complexes are. That's why the Northland Chamber is here to endorse it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Rhonda Green.
Morning. My name is Rhonda Green. I'm the Area Director of Sales of the Embassy Suites and the Homewood Suites at the Kansas City Airport. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Northland Hotels, several of which are here with me today. Smith Travel Research is the reporting agency for the hotel industry. Currently, they're reporting a year-to-date decline in occupancy in Kansas City, Platte County of 1.3%, and a decline in average daily rate of 1.5%. This means we're booking fewer room nights at a reduced rate. What that translates to is a reduction in sales tax for Kansas City. So I ask, how are we planning to address that shortfall? Additionally, Kansas City, Platte County is showing an increase in the number of guest rooms available by 1.1% so far in 2019, with new hotels currently in the build process. Quite simply, the building of new hotels in the Northland has outpaced the number of guests that are paying to stay there. We have to find a reason for travelers to stay in the Northland versus passing through, driving by on their way to other parts of the metro. This sports complex will drive additional revenue to local businesses in the Northland, including our hotels, and help to offset the loss of sales tax revenue due to the declining demand. In short, this complex is good for the Northland and has the support of the Northland hotels. Thank you for your time and consideration of this much-needed project.
Thank you. Dr. Rick?
Good morning again. Thank you for allowing me a moment to speak in support of this project. I've already mentioned that we have a school site, about an 80-acre site adjacent to this proposed project, and there will be mutual benefits, as I mentioned earlier. Parking, field space, and then also a potential cost share on the stadium project. I want to speak to the financial benefits to the school district for having this develop in our district. This is in Kansas City, but is in Platte County School District proper. And this is an eats-only TIF. And the commercial development that we talked about around this area will be fully assessed on the property tax side, and so it will be beneficial to the school district. This is important because we're one of the 5 fastest growing school districts in the state of Missouri, and maintaining a balance in our growth and development is important so that we're not placing too heavy a burden on our residential taxpayers. So this is a benefit financially for us as well. As an educator, I believe in keeping kids active and engaged. I think it's critical for positive growth and development, and one of the tools that we use to fight childhood obesity, and a project like this moves a needle on our efforts. And lastly, I support this project because I believe it's an investment in Kansas City, and it also is an investment in Platte County R3 School District. Thank you.
Thank you. This last card I have here in favor, last name Wood, and your Northland soccer parents. Sorry,
Dagmar Wood.
I didn't want to screw it up.
Yeah, that's okay. I came to you before as a commissioner here of Southern Platte County. Right now, I'm standing to you in front of you as a parent, a soccer parent, actually a parent of former soccer players, 3 of them. And I know that you will be receiving a deluge of information about the mass migration of parents and soccer players and wallets that travel to Kansas on the weekends because of the lack of soccer competitive fields. My boys started off in recreational. There's a great synergy that we have in the Northland where we've got both recreational and competitive. Some of them moved on to competitive and one's in college. But I wanted to share with you one little anecdote story that happened about 4 years ago that hasn't been mentioned yet. So one of my children who was in competitive, Missouri State Cup was supposed to be in Kansas City that year 4 years ago. And it's always in St. Louis. And what they somehow talked the organizers into coming to Kansas City. Well, that year, like it does in Kansas City, it rained, and it rained and rained. And all we had basically was grass fields at that time. What they did was at the very last minute, they moved State Cup from Kansas City back to St. Louis, where it just has continued to stay in St. Louis. So there are organizations, athletes, families, groups who would love to come here and have tried to come here and bring their kids and their wallets here to the Kansas City area for these types of huge tournaments, but there just are not the facilities to support that. So as much as it's reasonably, as you're able to financially make this work, I would really encourage you that there are organizations out there that are ready to support this. So thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you. I have no further public testimony cards, but I will open up the mic for anyone that would like to testify for or against at this time. Seeing no one, we as a committee have an obligation to make a recommendation one way or the other, but I will note prior to doing that we did receive letters in support from former council member Edward F. Ford III is what it says. Ed Ford, as I know him by. And then also there's Visit Platte, and as I referenced a little earlier, several letters from parents which signed their names as supporters of the Northland Alliance Youth Soccer Athletic Field, or parents as well of soccer players. So several letters, and I want to be able to note their participation in this process by sending these to us, and we will docket them as part of the record for this committee hearing. Committee members and our guests, do you guys have anything else you'd like to add, or not one way or the other? If not, committee members, do you all have a recommendation?
Sure. I'll move that committee substitute with actually the additions that our chairman has provided and I think read.
Go over those?
Why not? Let's go ahead and do that. I think our legal counsel had, but let's go ahead for the record.
In new section 5, that prior to the execution of a contract with a selected developer, the city manager is directed to present to council a financing plan identifying the specific sources of funding, including second district, in-district PIAC allocation in the amount of $250,000 per year for 4 years, subject to all code requirements and authorizing ballot language.
All right, and then also Mayor-elect Lucas wanted, I guess, an addition. What section was that? I think it's section 1.
Section 1 was just a discussion about the order in which we look to apply funds. I think the Director of Finance will have some record of it, but that's the part that's...
Okay. So
reordering, I think, was what was suggested earlier.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
right. So it would just be in the nature of, in Section 1, having language that perhaps says, frankly, finding funds in the following priority order or something of the sort. The start, of course, being actually what is D, the incremental economic activity from the KCI corridor TIF, followed by, I think, A, B, and C, with the park sales tax being the last on that list.
Right.
And then something perhaps to suggest, to the extent we can exhaust item D right before we go to the others, is the...
I would ask if you could send this to us as well. We'll vote on it, obviously, and before we go to the full council, depending on if it's today or tomorrow, whatever the recommendation may be, but let's make sure we get a copy of that. All right, any other additions? Okay, you have a recommendation, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll move that the committee substitute with the changes that were both suggested by you and Mayor-elect Lucas be reported out of this committee with recommendation of advance and due pass.
Second.
It's been moved in second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the ordinance passes. Anything else to come before the committee? We're adjourned.